First of all, thank you very much, all of you, for being here for this in-public meeting. And it's really good to have people here to ensure that you see this happening and you can tell your colleagues what you see and witness here as part of the scrutiny that takes place. I'm delighted to be at the Riverside Centre in Newport. This is a Compass meeting, just for clarity for you, that Compass stands for the Commissioner's Performance, Accountability, Scrutiny and Strategy meeting. Do feel free not to remember all of that and remember Compass if you like. They're held in public so that they're visible, accessible, and give members of the public the opportunity to send me their questions so that the questions are reflected in the challenges that I give and the questions that I ask of the Chief Constable today. I'm Michael Lane, your Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm joined today by Olivia Pinkney, who I'm sure many of you will know and have met before, is the Chief Constable of Hampshire Constabulary. I was elected last year, and part of my statutory duty as the Police and Crime Commissioner is to hold the Chief Constable to account for the delivery of operationally effective and efficient policing on the island and across Hampshire, Portsmouth and Southampton too. We're here today in an open environment for me to hold the Chief Constable to account, as I've said, but I also do this in many other ways, including formal progress and scrutiny meetings, one-to-one closed scrutiny and challenge sessions and written challenges. You would expect, and it is true, that the Chief Constable and I have a regular engagement. I feel free to interrupt her day by telephoning, emailing and other things, and it works the other way just as readily as we both need to. And so there is a need occasionally for us to stop and do it in a slightly more formal way. That's what today is about. Today I'll be scrutinising a range of policing issues, some that directly focus on policing here on the island, and some wider context and issues across the whole of the Hampshire Constabulary policing area. Today I shall be asking the Chief Constable questions on a range of matters including national and local security related to recent events, resourcing policing and particular areas that are in my post bag from members of the public, people that live here, including the supply of drugs, theft, hate crime, and the safety of vulnerable groups. Recent events, including acts of terror, criminal harm inflicted on innocent victims, and the terrible tragedy of the result of fire, these have all had significant impact on so very many personally, and all of us have felt outrage as well as empathy and condolences. And I'm aware that it touches the island too. And Tony Disson, whose brother lives on the island, is one that you may know of. And there are others too. So it does land very personally, all the events of where we're at. And it just now leaves me to begin my questions to the Chief Constable. The first question, perhaps unsurprisingly, is in the light of recent events, Chief Constable, would you explain what impact this has had on the Constabulary's protection of local people and how it might impact on your future planning?
Certainly, Commissioner, and as you've said, we are living in extraordinary times, and the events in Manchester, in London, both the acts of terror and the fire, and of course most recently at Finsbury Mosque, are dreadful, and they're dreadful for those local communities, but as you've just said, much more widely. Each of those touches Hampshire Constabulary as well as local citizens, as you've just described, and I'll just give a little bit of a flavour of what that means. So in response to each and every one of the terrorist incidents, there is the National Terrorism Response, which is well exercised, well planned, and Hampshire Constabulary is a part of that. We had, as an example, after Manchester, which happened at about 10:30 at night, we had our very specialist firearms officers in Manchester in the early hours of the next morning. So immediately went up and were hugely active in all of the ensuing events and days after that, and equally to London, to the events there. And then the following day, after the Manchester attack, the security level went up to critical, which has very significant implications, not just for policing, but for wider services as well. And just to remind people here, what that means is that we have, and we are today, at a threat level of severe. That means that a threat is highly likely, and we've been at that level for years. The move to critical for those few days after Manchester means that a terrorist attack was imminent, and thankfully that didn't take place. But we have good plans, we dusted them off, lots of people worked all night and continue to for many days. But we don't do that alone in policing, we do that with the local resilience forum, which the island emergency planners, blue light services, local authority are very, very closely aligned to. So we have good plans together and we put those plans into action. So we had the plans, we had the teams, we have the infrastructure with our partners within the constabulary to do what we needed to do. And a core part of that, of course, in terms of a response to both a terrorist incident, but also in terms of keeping people safe, is very much our neighbourhood police teams. They are crucial to that. And they were deployed across the island in greater numbers, in greater visibility. So extra patrols were put in. And we also had, and I'm sure residents will have seen that, extra firearms officers also out on the streets as well. So they were patrolling on foot in crowded places, very much to give that very visible reassurance as well as a heightened security. Going to the fire that you mentioned, the Grenfell fire, which is so terrible. In, again, the early hours following that, when people are ringing in, looking for loved ones, not knowing what's happened, the way that works nationally in policing is that there's a best way of describing it is a telephone network that is set up very, very quickly. And in Hampshire Constabulary, we set ours up within 2 hours, and we have officers and staff from all sorts of corners of the constabulary who come in. It's a secondary skill for them, so they keep that skill fresh and very rarely have to use it. But Hampshire Constabulary officers and staff taking the calls from very distressed members of the public, very worried for family and friends, very worried about what had happened. So we were taking those calls immediately and did so for a few days after that awful fire. But we do plan and we do train for these things that we hope that will never happen. And our plans did work. We will, of course, review them and debrief them and refresh them as you would expect, but they did work. So I am confident that should the worst thing happen in our area, we would be able to respond very, very well. So we did what we needed to do, both in terms of the move to critical, but also when the threat came back down, and we are continually reviewing all of our big events, and of course here on the island there are many, so we review those very regularly, but it's not without consequence. So if we're doing those patrols, be they firearms patrols, be they local officer patrols, they're not doing something else. So it is something that has caused us real stretch. I'm hugely proud of our officers and staff who have stepped up to that demand really selflessly and fantastically, but it has caused us real stretch. Because, as I say, if they're doing that, they're not able to do anything else. But that's how it affected us, both in seen and unseen ways, to quite a large extent.
Okay, so thank you very much for giving us the context. I hope many of you in the room will find that helpful to have heard in the Chief Constable's voice what the situation is. And I hope that you can encourage colleagues who might want to hear that to look. This event is being filmed and will go online after we complete here today, after a brief pause for quality control and uploading. But to make it clear to people, if you hear anybody with concerns, that here is a context statement for what happens from the Chief Constable. Thank you for that. A recent article in the county press, some of you, I'm sure many of you read the county press, has Russian roulette as its headline, dated 2nd of June, refers to 2 teenagers being hospitalised on the island, after taking rogue ecstasy tablets. Are you able to update me on this investigation and the steps the constabulary are taking on the island to tackle the supply of illegal drugs?
Absolutely. That headline, I think, is a very powerful one, because if it means people are having conversations around breakfast tables about that, then that's a really good thing, because, of course, we don't want our young people experimenting in that way. But as you say, it was 2 local teenage children. They were experimenting with what they thought was ecstasy. They ended up in hospital, and I'm very pleased to say they're now home and recovered. But they were lucky, and I am concerned about that level of experimentation, and I am concerned about the horrific harm that drugs can do, because it's the danger, it's the health benefits which are so crushing. Because frankly, one doesn't know what's in these tablets. You just don't know. And the chemical makeup morphs and changes so much that there is really no confidence that anyone could have as to what they're putting into their bodies. We can often find we've got tablets with ketamine in, with methamphetamine, so really, really dreadful drugs that can make people desperately unwell, and sometimes with very permanent consequences as well. So what did we do about it? Well, we take this very seriously. And I'm just going to point to Superintendent Sarah Jackson, who hope many of you will know, who's a superintendent here on the island, the most senior police officer here on the island. But so Sarah's team led that investigation. We wanted very quickly to find where those drugs had come from, because we wanted to contain it and we wanted to stop anyone else taking them. We did arrest a young person, a young lad, on suspicion of supplying those tablets to those two who fell ill. And as importantly, alongside the health service here, get a very quick public service message out in terms of this stuff's out there, don't take it, and let us know what's going on, really wanting to stop young people taking it. And the local media were fantastic in terms of getting that message out really, really fast. To our knowledge, there's been no one else admitted to hospital, so with those really severe health implications of anything similar. It does happen elsewhere around the constabulary, and as I say, you know, the what's in the drugs can change so very, very frequently. We have fantastic relationships with the local health service here, so particularly with A&E. And if they feel there's someone coming in with that may have taken, you know, a particularly dangerous drug, then they will tell us in order that we can try and stop other people falling into that same harm. In terms of the criminal side of it, we will always go after, we're always looking for the drug dealers, those that are preying on the drug users, trying to lure often young people into experimenting with things and taking risks around things. So it's a big part of what we do here on the island from the police service perspective. So looking for intelligence, looking to stem that supply of drugs. But it is a reality here, as sadly it is in every community.
Okay, thank you very much. The island is an appropriately renowned rural and countryside location. We all know that, and everyone in the room here will probably be smiling and agreeing as well. Valued by the community and visitors. Some residents have asked about animal welfare and crimes relating to harm to and theft of animals. Can you reassure them, Chief Constable, that this is on your radar and that if reported, such activity will be appropriately dealt with?
And it is, absolutely, I can reassure Commissioner. So animal cruelty, whether it's domestic pets, whether it's farm animals, is something we take very seriously, and we work hand in glove with the RSPCA. So if you don't know who to ring the police on 101 or 999, of course, if it's an emergency. And if it's for the police to deal with, we will, or we refer that call to the RSPCA. The member of the public doesn't have to do that. We do that. So that's not for people to worry about. But we also know how distressing it can be. I'm not aware of a specific problem on the island regarding thefts of pets. I know there were some concerns, and there was some social media activity quite recently where there were concerns about thefts of domestic cats. And I'm really pleased the local police community support officer spotted that on Facebook and did their own Facebook campaign saying, if it's happening, let me know, and put out some media releases as well, because we wanted to know if there was, you know, a reality behind the fears. To date, there were no calls on that Facebook, so either real people ringing up or social media reports to that event. But of course, if it is happening, we would want to know about it. Beyond that, a huge priority for you, Commissioner, is rural policing, as it is for me. And I know it's close to the heart of many people here. And we have a huge investment in our rural policing. We have a fantastic Inspector Lou Hubble, who leads and drives our rural policing strategy with enormous energy. She started out as a wildlife crime officer and has risen through the ranks to an inspector, and has set up the Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Rural Partnership Board. Fantastic relationship building. We have great Country Watch officers, many of whom will be at the show tomorrow with you, and work very closely with other departments such as firearms licensing. So there are lots of connections between different elements of policing, and of course community engagement. not only do the Country Watch staff and colleagues do that, but also the neighbourhood teams too. So it's really important that that happens, and my own Deputy Chief Constable, Sarah Glenn, has been the lead for rural policing for some time. We've also do Rural Times, so a publication to kind of bring the issues to the fore, and very pleased to say that we're award-winning as well. So at Superintendent Jackson's Awards very recently, when myself and the High Sheriff, we were there together. Inspector Buggy from the RSPCA was recently awarded a District Commander's Commendation for the work that he does and his team do with us. And Inspector Lou Hubble, was awarded an ABE last week for her work on rural policing. So there's a huge amount going on, spearheaded by great people.
It is really good to hear about the volume of that material on the island. There was a really good rural conference, and I hope that many who watch the recording of this will know that she was all about across the whole of your area, and I add my congratulations to her. But it's not just one person, it's the team who do it, and that's really valuable. I think the other thing, that just for emphasis, to make sure that I've heard this right, if people have some concerns, and as you just have with the animal welfare things, you can give the evidence, and your colleagues can give the evidence that that is not a high issue. Don't resist calling it in.
Absolutely. We would much rather know, because we can reassure, and we can make the connections between perhaps things that are perhaps geographically split on the island, but we can make a connection ourselves. We would much rather know.
Good, thank you. The island has a sizable population in their retirement years who might have different needs from and expectations from the police constabulary to keep them safe. Recently, the constabulary, working with partners on the island, ran a week of awareness, as I'm sure you're aware, raising for elderly residents the issues of rogue traders. And earlier this morning, I was with a community group who were talking about scamming and those sort of issues, so it is still quite topical in their minds. In the work here included the launch of the Isle of Wight Against Scam partnership. To what extent is crime against older people a problem on the island, and what preventative measures can older people take to protect themselves? And if I can add to that in the context of your reply, what support does the constabulary provide to elderly victims of crime? And if you could outline the elements of support you and your team provide.
Certainly, it is a problem. It is a very invasive type of crime, and I'll detail some of that in a moment, Commissioner. It's a very cruel type of crime. This island is a very beautiful and very safe place to live, and many people come here because it is a beautiful and safe place to live, as well as islanders who've grown up here. But you're right, the population differs here, so it's about a quarter of residents here are over 65, compared with just shy of 19%, so less than a fifth in the rest of the constabulary area. So it is a different balance of population, and that means that as a police service that delivers according to local need, then we have to do things slightly differently and tailored to the needs of the community here on the island, and discussing the issues particularly regarding older people. So what we've done here is island teams from the police officers are trained to a higher level, and more of them than regarding issues for older people than they are elsewhere. And Age UK have done that with us. So Age UK were fantastic, and they helped train all the neighbourhood police teams, as well as the fire teams actually, and the local authority community support officers last year to understand the issues, but also where to go to get other help. Because it's not always the police that are the right people to do things, but we can signpost to those that are better. What that meant was there were 4 sessions of training, a mixture of practical staff as well as theory training, and really understanding where the local services were, often voluntary sector, brilliantly done, that we could signpost and help people access. Because often we might turn up as an emergency, but actually the longer term support is dealt with better elsewhere. So an example of that, as you've said, a couple of months ago, we set up, we were the first partners to join. We were signing up to the Council's Isle of Wight Against Scams partnership. Really pleased to have done that. It's a multi-agency response led by the local authority, and it's to present a united front against fraudsters. So lots of things about raising awareness, preventing, if it happens, knowing what to do, lots of things like that. And the neighbourhood policing teams have been instrumental in all of that. Trading standards have a bit part to play as well. But fraudsters are very clever, and they come in many, many guises. So I think perhaps more classically, we would have expected fraudsters to turn up on a doorstep, pretend to be, from the gas or the water company, that kind of person, wave a slightly unclear ID card and make their way into the home. Whilst there is still a risk of that, it is much, much, much more mature and clever, sadly, than that nowadays. So people can ring up and say that they're from your bank or something else, and they say, don't worry, put the phone down, ring this number to verify it's me. The elderly person puts the phone down, the person who rung them keeps the phone line open, so when the elderly person rings up again, they're talking to someone else but on that same line. It's very plausible, it's easy to get tricked. There's lots of opportunities to trick people through email, through phishing, so looking to lure people to give their bank details out online. Very plausible, saying, oh my goodness, there's been a security thing, you must give us your password, do it now. A lot of pressure put on people to comply, and it's very easy to be tricked into it. Equally, pretending to be a family member or a friend abroad, saying, I've got stuck, send me some money so I can get home, happens too often. And also, well, they're all awful, but dating scams as well. People will prey on people who are lonely and create relationship and say, we'll meet for coffee, we'll go to the theatre, creating a relationship online for people who are lonely, and then the requests for money follow, and so on. And it can happen very slowly, and then, too often, I'm afraid, people who have been tricked are then very ashamed, and they don't tell anyone. They don't tell friends or family, they don't tell us, because they're ashamed. And I really want to reassure people that it is very easy to be tricked like this, and there is no shame in it. And I would much prefer people tell someone, because we can often trace back and stop these fraudsters doing it to other people. But there really is no shame in it. And if it has happened to them, I would really encourage them to come and tell us. My officers and staff will deal with it with great confidence. We'll treat people with enormous respect, because they have not been foolish. It is very, very easy to be tricked. So I'd really encourage people to come forward. Your question about particularly if someone is a victim, then as I say, I want them to come to us. We will treat it in confidence, we will treat it carefully, and we will, help them try and prevent it ever happening again, but also try and find the person on the end of the phone, the email, the request, wherever it might be.
So if they're at risk or they feel they've been scammed, do tell us confidentially.
Absolutely.
And they'll have the respect you've just so clearly described and the priority to tell.
Please, yeah, absolutely, Commissioner. And also there's lots and lots of information on the Hampshire Constabulary website. It's called Operation Signature. It's lots of prevention materials that people can either use themselves or indeed take to their neighbours and their loved ones to just talk them through. There's lots of prevention materials on there.
Okay, thank you. In a recent survey, and I should say that the last couple of questions and many of these questions are informed by particular input from members of the community here in a broader context. But in a recent survey that my office has been conducting, those who responded in any way saying that they felt unsafe cited theft and burglary as the issues that caused them concern. Straightforwardly, Chief Constable, what is the Constabulary's operational response to theft?
Well, we're the police, so it's part of what we do, and we do take it, particularly house burglaries, very, very seriously. Now, each and every one is too many. It is very rare here on the island, but if it happens to you, it matters enormously. Rather dully, but importantly, the rules about recording house burglary have changed. So it used to be if your garage or your shed were broken into and things taken, that wasn't called a house burglary. It is now. So and that changed on the 1st of April. So as the numbers start to come through, and we will explain this when the crime figures are published, those offences are now lumped in with house burglary. So please remember to look through that lens when those figures come out. But in terms of theft in general, house burglary is very invasive. We take it very seriously. We have great investigators here on the island. We do brilliant, so all our response and neighbourhood officers have a role. So if something does happen, they do a lot of work with the surrounding area as well. And of course, forensics and looking to gather the clues that offenders may have left behind. So that's in terms of house burglary. Theft more widely, we do see peaks, in June and September. So particularly when there's festival and large numbers of visitors, we do see that with pickpockets and that kind of crime, because we do sadly find, despite lots of good efforts by us, people will visit in order to commit that kind of criminality, and then we'll leave. So we'll come specifically with that in mind. And when we do have the big events like festivals, we do a lot of work with our intelligence from around the country, because people who are doing that will often be doing it to other festivals too. So there's a whole intelligence network around festivals nationally where we look for people and then try and pick them up as they travel down on the motorways and things like that. So we do try and stop people getting here if they're coming with that intent. But there's always lots of advice, there's always lots of prevention that we can do. But as I say, if it does happen, we have trained investigators who will investigate not every theft, but ones where there's been real harm as a result. They will investigate that and do everything they can to catch the person who's done it.
Okay, thank you. My plan sets a priority, as I'm sure you're aware, for championing community needs, and we rejoice in and celebrate the many diverse communities that we have, reflecting race, gender, identity, faith, sexual orientation and disability. But all of the groups come with their potential for vulnerabilities. Tackling hate crime is a priority, and on the island I funded some specific projects to mitigate in that area for vulnerable groups and increase awareness of potential hate crimes. What's the policing approach to limit these threats against our diverse communities?
This is something at the core of policing for us here on the island and in the wider constabulary area. So our job is to police people who need it, even if there are lots of reasons why they don't feel comfortable in coming forward. So we do not sit back and wait for people to come to us. Our job is to go and look for people who need us and then be fantastic in supporting them. That's what we're here for. So hate crime is vile, it's abhorrent, whatever the motivation. And we will always want to stop it happening and then root it out and do everything we can to find who's doing it and to stop it happening. It can be a real corrosive part of any society. It's awful in the 21st century that it should happen. So we work hard in times of peace, if you like, to build great relationships with lots and lots of communities. We don't, as I say, we don't just wait to do that for those that are happy to. We work really hard so that people trust us, understand us, and we understand them as much, so we can do the right thing by them, whenever that may be. And we need to build those relationships before they're needed, so when something does happen, we are able to help quickly and well. So we do put a lot of effort into that. One example, across the island, we have a number of specially trained, what we call LAGLOs, lesbian and gay liaison officers, a really hard-working team, and they come from all aspects of the policing family, officers, staff, volunteers, all sorts of people who do that. And they work alongside Anna Murray from Age UK, who's here. And as you say, Commissioner, the fantastic programme that you funded, Anna leads, and there's been so many events here on the island which have benefited members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community, LGBT community. So everything from referrals to conversations to evenings where members of the public want to find out more and from my staff can understand more and learn more. So there's been lots and lots of that, and I understand from Anna that actually the rest of the constabulary is now after the same thing. So I think you've got lots of ferry trips ahead of you so that others can learn from what's been going on here. We also work with Breakout Youth, so they're an independent charity based on the island who offer confidential support for young people as well. And that was originally for 11 to 21-year-olds, but it's now gone down to the age of 7. because the need was established there. And some things that I'm really proud of. So after the awful attack in June last year in Orlando in the nightclub, that Newport Police Station flew the Pride flag, which was just, a symbolic thing, yes, but so important to stand proudly with people around the world. So there's lots that we do, and that's just one aspect, of course, an important aspect of hate crime, but the same goes for faith, for race, for age, for disability. We have really strong connections. We're never resting on our laurels to make sure we are there and we are accessible and we understand what's going, and we will stamp out hate crime with the wider society, I know, as much as we possibly can.
I wonder if I could ask you just to reinforce, you say we're accessible.
Yeah.
Some of the groups find themselves, despite our intent, that doesn't land as accessible so well for them. So could you just reinforce the calling in if people are at risk for them, and the message you were giving earlier of the respect that those confidential calls would have?
Absolutely, and of course people can report on the phone, but we also have social media if it's not urgent, or indeed walk in and talk to one of the colleagues that you see out and about. But people will always be treated with respect. We have, as an example, LAGLOs, lesbian and gay liaison officers, within the call centre. So people who ring up for an emergency or on a 101, there are people on the end of those phones who are trained and are able to do that.
And could you also just reinforce, there are some technical issues that people think is of concern in the vulnerabilities that people have, and in hate crime particularly. Can you just reinforce that it's their sense of the threat and the vulnerability that they have that they should report, and that we will deal with that, and it's not excluding in any sense of listening to their voice first?
No, an important point, Commissioner, thank you. So, absolutely right. When something happens, it's a hate crime. If someone feels it's a hate crime, it is a hate crime. There's no external decision about whether it is or not. If someone feels that it is, then it is. So someone's lived experience matters enormously.
Thank you for that reinforcement. As the Police and Crime Commissioner for the island, I'm often asked about resources generally deployed to the island to keep people safe. Some individuals that approach me have a sense of being in some second class, they often say, when compared to services they see on the North Island and elsewhere. One member of the public specifically challenged that after an alleged assault, he was told that, his quotes, due to lack of funding, there is nothing the police can do. Chief Constable, can you respond to the questions in this and offer people reassurance about the attention that the island and its policing attracts in your priorities?
So there's the specific there, Commissioner, and then the wider point. And as you always do, when there's a specific that comes to your notice, you give it to me, and because I don't like the sound of that, and find out what's gone on. So on that particular case, which of course we shouldn't share more widely for that individual's sake, actually there was a very strong investigation. We did look at the CCTV, we did talk to witnesses, and indeed it wasn't as it was first described. So there was a thorough investigation, and in fact it wasn't on the island either, but be assured that was not quite as reported to you. But more widely, clearly the geography of this island means that it needs to be resourced in a different way. It needs to be staffed in a different way. So acutely aware of the time it can take to get here. So we have, under Sarah's leadership, more officers and staff here than, if you like, the need if it was attached to the mainland, and I'm not advocating that at all, please don't take it in that way. If it was attached, then would normally be here for other areas of the constabulary because of the unique nature of the geography. So we have resident neighbour policing teams, response teams, dog handlers, roads policing officers, firearms officers, investigators, community, CSIs, the fingerprint people who do more than fingerprints, I should say. So we have people who investigate serious and complex crime as well as more local crime. So that entire policing response is here. But I also describe it as layers of an onion, in that also all of those colleagues here are supported by all the other officers and staff within the constabulary, as any other community is. So they're the ones that are here, and there's about 150 officers and about 30 community support officers, and then a number of volunteers and special constables on top of that. But we also bring people onto the island when they're needed, and then of course they go back. And we move our people around all the time around the constabulary area, and the island is no different. So when there is a particular need here, then we will bring specialist investigators in or other specialist officers in as needed, and we do that routinely. We also, of course, have the Marine Unit, which is really important to the neighbourhood that is on the water, the local policing that is on the water, as well as the more high-end threat in serious organised criminality and people trafficking, which they also have a role in. But they are there to help police the neighbourhood that is on the water, on the island and beyond that. But as I say, we bring in other people as needed, and we do a lot of analysis. So we look at where we can expect crime issues to be so we can get ahead of them. So if we anticipate an issue, we will make sure we've got people there before it happens, and we do an awful lot of that as well. But I am aware of the travelling times. I know it takes longer to get here than it does to whiz down the M3 or along the M27. So that's why we have more here than we would otherwise. But of course, a huge number, not all, but a huge proportion of officers and staff who do serve here live here and love it here. And many of them are islanders by birth, and many of them live here for the duration of their work here, and they wouldn't have it any other way. So we do have a lot of people here. Would I like there to be more? Of course. And it would be remiss of me to not mention the very hot topic that is in the national news about funding in light of the events in recent weeks and the election and so on. And I am on record, Commissioner, as you know, to say that yes, we are the second lowest funded police force in the country. And whilst we will always be there when people need us, so we will also always answer emergencies, we will always investigate serious and complex crime, depending on what happens, and I honestly don't know right now what our funding future looks like, there will be choices to be made. But we are thinking that through very carefully. I will always be very honest. I know you take this very seriously indeed. But we do need fair funding for this constabulary, and I know you're the loudest voice on that.
I'm a loud voice, certainly, that's for sure. Is it helpful to say, and seeing as I start, I think it probably is, the challenge that I give you, not infrequently, that we need to create the space to understand national funding and its changes. And my challenge to you is, at any point, the risk that you're taking operationally goes to a level that you over concerns you, that's the day that you're in the office, having predicted it, to tell me about it, because I think I'm clear to you and expect you to respond to my operationally effective is essential that we protect to keep people safer. Absolutely.
So again, on record to say we are very stretched. The recent weeks, of course, haven't helped that, and who knows if this is a new normality. I very, very much hope not. But we are very stretched. However, we squeeze the efficiency. So every single public pound that you give to me to spend on policing, we should squeeze each and every one as hard as we can, and we do. We know where we are for this financial year. We know where we're going to find some savings for next year. Beyond that, I will come and talk to you if I feel we get to that point. But we're doing that thinking over this summer.
Good. I think we're on the last formal question of this session today, and it resonates, I think, with some of the remarks that you've made earlier, but is in a particular part of it. The Isle of Wight is, as we know very well, internationally known as a beautiful destination, and the island population can almost double due to the major events and festivals. These are important to the island's economy, but also have a major impact on the resident community. My question to you is, the island community want to hear from you what impact staging such events has on the provision of local policing on the island, and to hear from you that visitors and locals are kept safe at these key events in the island's economic and community life.
It is a big part of life here, and the short answer, and I'll expand upon it, is that we always enhance our policing for the big events and not at the expense of the very local. So we do specific policing for those events and we retain the very local policing. That's the simplest way of describing it. But as you say, lots of festivals, lots of events, the show tomorrow being one. And for each of the events, we work hand in glove with the organisers of whether it's a festival or a county show, and we work alongside the local authority with strategic planning. And so we work out together what the security operation and the reassurance operation should be for that event. And there's a blend of stewarding as well as policing as well as other agencies there as well. But I also know that aside from an event, life goes on as usual and as normal for islanders. So we do need to get that balance right. We had the festival very recently here, and it was hot on the heels of all those awful events that we spoke about first thing in this meeting. So we did refresh all of the plans for all of the events over the summer, as you would have expected us to have done. And we did that with the event organisers, and we did amend the policing presence as a result of that. So we had specialist resources, including firearms officers, patrolling on foot very openly with their main weapons. And it was an extraordinary response that we got. You know, the numbers of children high-fiving firearms officers is just fabulous and lovely. Letters in, and that's never happened. And it's around the UK. It's never happened to policing in that way before. So the mood felt very, very different. In the past, I would argue, if people had seen firearms officers in some situations, it would have made them feel worried as to what's going on. Very different right now, and a lovely warm response from all the festival goers who saw them. We had some lovely letters in and lovely photographs. I'm not going to mention in a public forum the numbers of additional people we put in to special events, because that would be part of giving away the intelligence if people did want to cause anyone any harm. But rest assured, we do put more firearms officers in, we do put more routine patrolling in, and we are going to continue to do that on a festival or event by event basis into the future. And it's not about alarming people, it is about two things. One, about reassuring them, of course, but also, should the unthinkable happen, they're on site and they would be able to deal with that. But it's not just about the threat of terrorism. Often at the festivals and the events, there are opportunities for people to prey on others, and particularly young people. So there's been some fantastic work over the last couple of years, particularly with local authority children's services, where they're on site, there's lots of security, so young people have a different coloured wristband, for instance, than an adult. Lots of proactive information for young people to keep themselves safe at festivals. And the Safety Advisory Group, which is where all the partners come together, of which the police have one, work really hard with the organisers to stop young people often coming to harm through drink, drugs, alcohol, sometimes a blend. Not only the physical aspects of that, but also it can leave them vulnerable to people preying on them. So if their senses are dulled, then they might find themselves preyed on in other ways, and we really don't want that to happen. So lots of work goes on. Much like I said earlier, all that planning happens way before the festival itself, and then as the days get closer, we flex and change it depending on what the intelligence and the mood is for the event itself.
Good. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the clarity and the information that you've given in this session today. I think I can see from the people that are here that they've been paying close attention, and I think there will be rich opportunities for that, those answers to the questions in your voice, to reassure and to inform, which is part of what this session is about, what your stance is in the difficult circumstances we've found ourselves in over the few months, and in the strategic circumstances of resourcing issues and change issues. So thank you very much for your clear and confident answers. Thank you very much.